The galaxy was dying. Worlds that once shined bright were now nothing but drifting ash in the void. Stars that once guided explorers now burned dim, hidden behind clouds of war and smoke. Everywhere, silence ruled, and that silence was heavier than any weapon. The great alliance that once stood proud beside humanity had fallen. Empires had collapsed, and their banners were nothing but torn fabric scattered in space. The Vorn Dominion, cold and merciless, had crushed every voice of freedom. Planets surrendered, fleets vanished, and even the strongest hearts began to fade. Among the ruins of a broken city on the world of Lyrithia stood an alien soldier named Saran. Her armor was cracked, her eyes hollow, her spirit tired. She was young, but already felt centuries old. Every day, she watched smoke rise from what used to be homes. Every night, she whispered to herself that maybe tomorrow would be different, but tomorrow always brought more fire. The allied species once spoke of humans as legends. They were the protectors of the weak, the warriors of hope, the voices that made the stars tremble. But humans had disappeared generations ago. No one knew where they went or why they left. Some said humanity destroyed itself. Others said they escaped beyond the galactic rim. Whatever the truth, no one expected them to return. Saran's father used to tell her stories about the Terrans. He said they were different, that they did not fight for power but for purpose. He said they could face fear and still smile. But those were only stories now, dust buried under broken memories. Saran had stopped believing long ago. The wind carried the scent of metal and ash. Half the city was gone, the rest sinking under the weight of defeat. Saran walked among ruins where children once played. She found a small metal sphere, a child's toy, burned and broken. She held it in her hand, staring at it for a long time. That small piece of metal felt heavier than her weapon. At the top of an old tower, a damaged beacon light blinked weakly. It was one of the last distress signals of the planet. Saran climbed the steps slowly, her boots scraping against stone. She reached the control panel, covered in dust and cracked screens. No one had touched it for months, maybe years. She looked at it and whispered, "You can rest now." Still, something inside her refused to let go. She pressed the power switch. The light blinked once, then twice. The signal went out into the void, a small whisper across endless darkness. She laughed softly, knowing no one would ever hear it. It was foolish, desperate, meaningless. And yet, as the signal disappeared into the stars, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Far above the planet, beyond the reach of any known fleet, the stars shimmered faintly. Saran could not see it, but somewhere, light shifted. Somewhere far beyond forgotten worlds, something ancient began to stir. The signal traveled, bouncing between cold moons and empty relays. It carried her voice, weak but alive. It carried a name, humanity. Saran stayed by the beacon until sunrise. The sky turned red, and the sun rose like blood over the battlefield. She felt the warmth on her face and thought of her father's words again. "Humans never give up," he used to say. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what that meant. But in her heart, she only felt silence. The Vorn patrol ships passed overhead, their engines roaring. She hid under debris, gripping her rifle, waiting for them to pass. They hunted survivors every morning, making sure no one dared to resist. Saran watched them go, anger burning deep inside her chest. For a moment, she wished she had never known hope at all, because hope only hurt when it died. When the patrol disappeared, she stood again, facing the sky. She whispered to herself, "If they ever return, I want to see them with my own eyes." Her voice was small, lost in the wind. No one answered, no ship appeared, no miracle came. Only silence remained, cold and endless. But far across the stars, on the edge of known space, something heard her call. Buried deep inside a forgotten human relay, a signal light blinked to life. A machine woke up after hundreds of years of sleep, and a message flashed across an old Terran screen. Signal detected from Lyrithia, distress code A-17, preparing response. And somewhere in the blackness of space, the engines of the Terran fleet began to burn again. The night stretched longer than it should have. Saran sat near the broken console of the beacon, her back against the cold metal wall. The wind howled through the cracks of the tower, carrying dust and memories. Her armor lights flickered weakly, running low on power. The silence felt endless, like the stars themselves had stopped breathing. She stared at the sky above, endless and cruel, filled with faint burning trails of ships that once belonged to her people. Now they were gone, erased by the Vorn Dominion. She wondered how long the galaxy could survive under that iron rule. Her thoughts drifted back to the message she had sent, the last beacon. It was foolish, she knew, but the small spark inside her refused to die. Far away, beyond the reach of known charts, a small signal touched an ancient network. It passed through abandoned satellites, forgotten listening posts, and deep space arrays. One of them, buried under the frozen surface of a dead moon, came alive after centuries of silence. Its systems hummed, gears turned, and a blue light ignited. The signal was old but clear, repeating Saran's code again and again. In the heart of the Terran Fleet Command, far beyond the outer rim, something responded. Sensors lit up, consoles flickered, and a low alarm echoed through the dark control room. Captain Adrian Vale walked in, his gray uniform marked with the insignia of the long-lost Terran defense. He frowned at the display, his voice steady but sharp. "Who's transmitting this frequency?" he asked. The technician turned, nervous and pale. "Sir, it's from Lyrithia, the old Alliance world." The captain paused, his heart skipping a beat. Lyrithia was one of the last planets they swore to defend before the Exodus, before humanity vanished into the dark. The room grew tense. No one had spoken that name in centuries. Vale leaned closer, reading the data on the screen. The signal was weak but alive, carrying the old emergency code that only humans once used. "Activate long-range scan," he ordered. Engines hummed across the vast human-arc ship known as the Horizon Dawn. Its crew had lived generations in isolation, building strength, waiting for a time to return. Back on Lyrithia, Saran dozed off beside the beacon. Dreams haunted her, visions of old battles, burning skies, and unknown voices calling her name. She saw a blue light in the sky, but when she woke, it was gone. Only the cold wind greeted her, whispering across the ruins. She sighed, whispering, "I must be going mad." Yet, somewhere deep within her heart, she felt movement. Something in the stars had changed. The Terran Fleet Council gathered in the main chamber of the Horizon Dawn. Admiral Ryan, old but strong, stood before the galaxy's map projected in the air. "We swore to return if the galaxy ever cried for us," he said slowly. "The signal is proof. Someone still believes." The council members exchanged silent looks. They all knew what returning meant. War, sacrifice, the risk of losing everything again. But humanity had never been the kind to turn away from those in need. "Prepare a scout fleet," Ryan ordered, his eyes shining with purpose. "Let the stars know that humanity still remembers." Engines roared through the massive shipyards orbiting the Terran colonies. Old vessels, covered in dust and memory, were powered up again. The Resolute, the Aegis, and the Vanguard, ancient human destroyers, shook off centuries of silence. Their blue thrusters ignited, burning brighter than any sun. The message was clear. Humanity was moving again. On Lyrithia, thunder rolled through the horizon. Saran looked up, confused. The clouds above the ruins flickered faintly, glowing with distant light. It wasn't lightning, it was something else, something alive. She felt her pulse quicken. For a second, she thought she heard a low hum echoing from the heavens. Her radio crackled, faint static whispering through broken speakers. No clear words, just sound, like someone breathing across the void. She ran back to the beacon and stared at the control screen. It was still transmitting, its light now steady, no longer fading. She didn't know that somewhere beyond light years, someone was watching her signal with pride. The humans had heard her. They were on their way. And as the dawn rose again over the broken city, Saran stood tall. For the first time in her life, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a promise written in the stars. The third sunrise came slower than usual. Saran had not slept, her eyes fixed on the sky above the ruins. Something inside her refused to rest, a quiet voice whispering that today would be different. The air felt heavy, electric, almost alive. Even the wind carried a strange hum, like the world itself was holding its breath. She climbed the broken tower again, her boots slipping on dust and ash. From there she could see the wide valley stretching across the city's bones. It was silent, lifeless, except for a few scattered fires still burning from the last bombardment. The Vorn ships had passed the night before, their crimson engines like bleeding wounds in the clouds. But now the sky was strangely empty. No enemy patrols, no sound of war, just waiting. Saran touched the beacon again, its screen blinking weakly. Still alive, she whispered, her voice tired but calm. She didn't know that far beyond her world, human ships were already on the move. Through wormholes and dark space lanes, ancient Terran cruisers awakened from centuries of silence. Engines roared, their blue thrusters tearing across the void like burning comets. For the first time in hundreds of years, the name of Earth echoed again in the stars. On board the HMS Resolute, Admiral Ryan stood at the command bridge. Before him stretched a map of the galaxy, filled with dead worlds and fading signals. His voice was calm, filled with purpose. "Set course for Lyrithia," he ordered, "and prepare the fleet for descent." Crew members saluted, eyes shining with emotion. They had trained their entire lives for this day, the day humanity would return. Back on Lyrithia, the air began to change. A deep rumble echoed through the ground, faint but growing stronger. Saran frowned and looked up, shielding her eyes from the rising light. At first, she thought it was thunder again, but thunder didn't sound like that. It was deeper, steady, mechanical, alive. The clouds twisted, the wind roared, and the ashes lifted from the ground as if gravity itself was trembling. Then she saw it. A small glimmer, far beyond the clouds, glowing blue like a falling star. Another one followed, then another. Within moments, the entire sky lit up with hundreds of streaks descending from the heavens. Each one burned brighter than the sun, leaving trails of pure sapphire flame. Her heart raced, her breath caught in her chest. The old stories spoke of this light, the fire of humanity's ships, the color of hope. It wasn't myth anymore, it was real. As the first vessel broke through the atmosphere, the ground shook. Buildings cracked, glass shattered, and dust clouds rolled through the streets. The ship was enormous, shaped like a blade cutting through the air. Its engines glowed blue, its surface marked with the emblem of the Terran fleet. Saran fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her heart screamed in disbelief and awe. "They came back," she whispered, her voice shaking. They really came back. The ship hovered above the ruins, casting a shadow across the entire city. Massive landing crafts descended, their lights scanning for survivors. Drones flew out like glowing insects, rebuilding comms and stabilizing the atmosphere. Every move was precise, controlled, powerful. Human soldiers emerged, their armor silver blue, carrying weapons that hummed with quiet energy. They moved with discipline, scanning for threats and injured allies. To Saran, they looked like gods walking among ashes. From her vantage point, she could see one soldier remove his helmet. A human face, pale, scarred, but alive, looked up at the sky with the same wonder she felt. The man spoke softly into his calm. "We made it, sir. We're on the ground." And across the fleet, voices responded with emotion they could no longer hide. "Welcome home, Terrence," someone said over the comms. The words echoed through every ship, every heart. The Vorn Dominion satellites detected the arrival seconds later. Warnings flashed across enemy channels, commanders shouting in disbelief. "Humans, it's the humans," one voice screamed. The Vorn fleets began to mobilize, but it was already too late. The humans had returned, and the stars themselves seemed to burn with their light. Saran stumbled down the tower, running toward the landing zone. Her legs felt weak, her vision blurred, but she didn't care. Every step felt like a dream she had waited her entire life to see. The wind carried dust and blue light across her path. As she reached the street, she stopped and stared. Before her stood the symbol she had seen in her father's old stories. A white flag marked with a blue star. The mark of the Terran Alliance. The humans had come back from the stars, and with them came something the galaxy had forgotten. Hope. The sky still shimmered with blue light. The smoke had begun to fade, revealing the shapes of ships that seemed carved from light and steel. Everywhere the air vibrated with energy, and even the ashes lifted gently as if pulled by invisible hands. Saran stood among the ruins, her armor glowing faintly from the reflection of the great ship above. The humans had truly returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Inside the flagship HMS Resolute, Admiral Ryan stood in silence. Before him stretched a massive holographic display showing Lyrithia's surface, enemy zones, and scattered survivor signals. The bridge was alive with voices, orders, and the low hum of reactors waking after centuries of sleep. The Admiral's eyes were calm, but filled with emotion that his crew could feel without a word. He leaned forward and spoke softly, his voice deep and steady. "Begin Operation Dawnfire." At that command, the entire Terran fleet came alive. Thousands of drones launched from carriers, scanning the surface. Human medics, engineers, and security teams began descending from orbit. They were not here to conquer. They were here to rebuild. Ryan turned to his first officer, Commander Hale, and said, "No civilian left behind, no ally forgotten." His tone was quiet but absolute, and the room responded with one word, "Aye, sir." Saran could see the landing crafts coming down like glowing meteors. Their thrusters melted the frost off the ruined streets, turning ashes into light. When one of them touched the ground near her, she stepped back, shielding her eyes from the blinding glow. The doors opened slowly, steam rushing out, and human soldiers stepped forward. Their armor was shining, marked with symbols she didn't recognize, yet everything about them felt familiar. They moved as one, calm and fearless, scanning, helping, securing. One of them approached her, his voice firm but kind. "Are you injured?" he asked. Saran shook her head slowly, too stunned to speak. The human lifted his helmet, revealing tired eyes that carried both strength and sorrow. He smiled faintly and said, "You're safe now." She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the words refused to come. For the first time in years, she felt something warm rising inside her chest. Not fear, not confusion, but peace. Over the horizon, explosions echoed. The Vorn forces had detected the landing and sent their interceptors, but the humans were ready. From orbit, the Aegis and Vanguard locked targets. Energy beams cut through the clouds like lightning made of purpose. Each shot was precise, controlled, and devastating. The ground shook, but the sky glowed brighter. The human fleet moved like a living storm, unstoppable and graceful. Inside the command deck, Admiral Ryan watched the readings as the Terran ships reclaimed the skies. He pressed a button on the comm and spoke to all frequencies, his voice broadcast across every human vessel and allied receiver. "This is Admiral Ryan of the Terran fleet," he said. "To all survivors on Lyrithia, hold your positions. Humanity has returned. You are not alone." The words carried across static and broken channels. Even in destroyed outposts where no one believed hope could live, that voice reached hearts. Saran heard it through her helmet's broken radio, and tears blurred her vision again. It wasn't just a signal, it was a promise. The alien refugees hidden in tunnels lifted their heads. Children who had never seen humans before clung to their parents as the sound of Terran gunships passed overhead. The galaxy's ghosts had come back to life. They brought food, medicine, and safety to a world that had forgotten the meaning of mercy. The Admiral stood silently for a moment, then looked out the window at the blue storm of ships in the distance. "Humanity doesn't rule," he murmured. "We remember." Commander Hale smiled softly. "It's good to be home, sir." Ryan nodded. "Home is wherever we stand for the light." Down below, Saran watched as human engineers built emergency domes and shelters using machines that floated like glowing angels. They moved with rhythm, restoring what the war had stolen. Children waved at them, and for the first time, laughter echoed between broken walls. The sound felt strange and beautiful. But far beyond Lyrithia, in the cold space of the Dominion, the enemy leaders watched in silence. They had underestimated the humans once before, and it had cost them an empire. Now, fear spread through their ranks again. They whispered to one another that the humans had returned not as soldiers, but as something greater. Symbols of defiance, unity, and vengeance. As night fell, the sky of Lyrithia glowed soft blue from the engines above. Saran stood among the survivors and looked up at the flagship shining like a star. She whispered, the voice that brought hope back. And in that light, even the ruins seemed to breathe again. The voice of command had awakened the galaxy, and the fire of Humanity was burning once more. The calm that followed was short. The sky above Lyrithia still burned blue, but now another color appeared. Red, deep and sharp, tearing across the horizon like open wounds. Vorn warships were coming, their engines glowing with hate. The ground trembled, the air turned hot, and the peace that humanity had brought was about to be tested. Saran stood near the defense post the humans had built around the ruins. She could feel the vibration of the incoming fleet through her boots. The Terran soldiers around her moved with quiet precision. No panic, no fear. They checked weapons, loaded energy cells, and calibrated turrets. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment since the day they left the stars. Inside the HMS Resolute, alarms echoed through every deck. Admiral Ryan stood before the command table, his eyes on the glowing red dots moving fast toward orbit. Vorn fleet approaching from the dark side of the planet, reported Commander Hale. Ryan nodded once. So they've decided to die here, he said softly. Then his voice turned firm, echoing through the calm. All units, defensive formation, no retreat. We hold this world. The order spread like thunder. In the blackness of space, the Terran fleet moved as one body. Carriers, destroyers, and interceptors formed a diamond wall above the planet. Their thrusters painted the void in blue fire, and the symbol of the Terran star shone bright once more. For every human soldier, this was not just a battle. It was the moment they proved that humanity had returned for good. Saran watched from the surface as the sky exploded into light. Lines of laser fire streaked across the heavens, red against blue. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The Terran cannons roared, shaking the clouds, each blast ripping enemy ships apart with perfect accuracy. The humans fought not with rage, but with control, with a kind of grace that made the chaos seem like music. Then the enemy descended. Dropships broke through the atmosphere, landing in waves across the city ruins. The ground forces of the Vorn Dominion, tall, armored, and cruel, emerged with shrieks that froze the air. Saran raised her rifle and stood beside the Terran soldiers. She was no longer a survivor. She was part of the fight. "Hold the line," shouted a human officer. "They want fear. Give them fire." The first clash hit like a storm. Explosions rippled across the streets, dust and smoke turning the world gray. Saran fired again and again, covering the wounded. Beside her, human soldiers moved like shadows, fast and steady, their armor shining under fire. She saw one fall, then another step forward without hesitation. They fought as if loss meant nothing, only purpose remained. Above them, the Aegis unleashed a plasma barrage that split the enemy formation in half. Bright waves of blue energy consumed entire squadrons. But the Vorn were endless, their ships still pouring in from orbit. For every one destroyed, two more arrived. Saran looked up and whispered, "There are too many." Her voice trembled, but a nearby human soldier placed a hand on her shoulder and said calmly, "Then we'll just have to make it look like we're more." Inside the Resolute, Admiral Ryan watched as data streamed in from every battlefront. Losses, victories, chaos, all moving in rhythm. He spoke quietly into the command mic. "Activate Archon Protocol." For a moment, the stars dimmed. Then the Terran flagship's core flared bright like a newborn sun. A deep hum filled space, followed by a shockwave of blue light expanding outward. Every human ship synced its systems, their energy fields merging into one. The fleet became a single entity, a living wall of light. Down on the surface, the fighting paused as the night sky transformed. A curtain of blue energy shimmered above the planet. The enemy's bombardment stopped in midair, their firepower dissolving against the field. Saran stared upward, her heart pounding. "What is that?" she whispered. A human pilot's voice echoed through the calm. "That's humanity saying no." The counterattack began. Human fighters dived through the shield, engines roaring. Missiles streaked through the void, leaving trails of white fire. Each impact shattered enemy cruisers into fragments of molten metal. In orbit, the Vorn commander screamed for retreat, but it was too late. The Terrans had turned the tide. Saran and the ground troops pushed forward, reclaiming the streets. She fought beside humans who bled, but never backed away. They fought not for victory, but for everyone who still believed. By sunset, The red glow of the Vorn fleet was gone, replaced by the calm hum of human ships holding orbit. The sky that had once burned blue with fire now shimmered with peace. Saran dropped to her knees, exhausted, covered in dust. A human medic ran to her side, offering water. She smiled weakly and looked up at the fleet above. "They won," she whispered. The medic nodded and said quietly, "No, we won." And as the twin suns of Lyrithia set behind the mountains, the light reflected off the Terran ships like a promise carved into the sky. The battle was reborn, and so was hope. Humanity had not just returned. They had reclaimed the war was quiet now. The thunder of cannons had faded, and the last fires of the battlefield were dying under the light of dawn. Lyrithia, once a world of ruins and sorrow, was breathing again. The air still smelled of smoke and steel, but behind it was something new, something warm. It was hope, fragile but alive. Saran walked through the streets that had been nothing but rubble a day before. Now, human engineers and drones were everywhere, repairing walls, clearing debris, planting new life. Children watched them with wide eyes, smiling for the first time in years. Everywhere she looked, there was movement, sound, and laughter. The silence that once ruled this place was gone, replaced by the rhythm of rebuilding. Above the planet, the Terran fleet shone like a constellation. Thousands of ships floated in perfect formation, their blue engines glowing softly in orbit. They were no longer just soldiers, they were guardians of light. Across the galaxy, the signal spread, transmitted through every old relay. "Humanity has returned," the message said, and worlds that had forgotten courage began to remember. In the city's central square, a tall communication tower stood rebuilt. Saran stood beside a group of human officers, watching as they raised the Terran banner beside her people's flag. The two colors blended in the wind, one blue, one silver, united under the same sky. A human voice spoke through the broadcast channel, calm and proud. "To all our allies, you are not forgotten," it said. "This is the beginning of a new dawn." Admiral Ryan stood in the main bridge of the HMS Resolute, watching the transmission spread. His crew was tired but proud, every face marked with sweat and ash but shining with quiet satisfaction. He spoke softly to Commander Hale. "They believed we were gone." Hale smiled. "They'll never forget again." Ryan nodded slowly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Hope isn't given, it's remembered." On the surface, Saran joined a team distributing supplies to the survivors. Human medics treated the wounded with technology her people had never seen. Machines hovered above the ground, scanning bodies and repairing armor with beams of light. It was as if the humans had mastered compassion as deeply as they had mastered war. She looked at a child laughing beside a human nurse and thought to herself, "They fight like fire, but they heal like light." Night fell again, and the city glowed in soft blue. The Terran power cores lit every corner with warmth. From the distance, she could see human soldiers sitting beside alien workers, sharing stories, food, and silence. Different faces, different worlds, but one purpose. In that moment, she realized the true reason why the humans were feared and loved. Not because of their weapons, but because of their will. Messages began pouring in from nearby systems. Planets that had gone dark for decades were lighting their beacons again. Colonies that had surrendered now stood ready to rise. Even the smallest outposts sent transmissions of unity and faith. "The humans are back," they said. "The galaxy stands with them." In the command deck, Ryan looked at the map of returning signals. Every glowing point was a voice rising from darkness. He turned to his officers and said, "It begins here, but it won't end here." Hale asked, "Do we rebuild the old alliance?" Ryan shook his head. "No, we build something better, something that lasts." Saran climbed to the top of the same tower where she had once sent that last hopeless signal. The beacon was no longer weak and blinking. It was strong, shining with Terran energy. She looked up at the night sky, where the fleet hovered like a sea of stars. A tear slipped down her cheek, not of pain but of peace. She whispered to herself, "They heard us." The wind caught her words and carried them into the sky. From orbit, a Terran communication officer smiled as her console picked up the faint voice from the surface. "Transmission received," she said softly. Admiral Ryan looked out the viewport, where Lyrithia glowed beneath them like a jewel. He spoke in a low voice. Every world will remember this day, the day hope returned. And as the night stretched on, the stars around Lyrithea began to shine brighter. Not from war, not from fire, but from unity. The galaxy that once trembled in fear was now whispering a single truth. That no darkness lasts forever when humanity stands with the light. The war had taken much, but it had given something greater back. Faith, courage, and the return of hope. Stars. The stars were quiet again, but this time, it was not the silence of death. It was peace, gentle and calm, spreading across the galaxy like a heartbeat. The war was over, the Vorn dominion shattered, its ships scattered across the void, and the worlds that had once trembled in darkness were waking to a new dawn. On the surface of Lyrithea, the ruins had begun to fade beneath fresh steel and growing life. Terran engineers worked beside alien builders, raising towers of light where ashes once lay. Fields that had been black with fire now shimmered green again. Children of many races played under banners stitched with both human and alien symbols. The scars of war were deep, but they were no longer wounds. They were stories. Saran walked through the rebuilt capital, now alive with energy and sound. Everywhere she went, she saw humans laughing, working, helping. They were not conquerors. They were family returned home. Every face carried the same expression, quiet pride and unspoken relief. She had never seen hope so real that it could be touched. The Terran fleet remained in orbit, no longer a weapon but a shield. Its ships glowed softly, forming a ring of protection around the world they had saved. Admiral Ryan stood by the main viewport of the HMS Resolute, his reflection framed against the stars. He had fought 1,000 battles, lost countless friends, but this moment was different. This was not victory, it was renewal. Commander Hale approached, holding a data pad filled with transmission reports. Dozens of worlds have pledged to join the new alliance, he said with a small smile. Ryan nodded slowly. Good. This time it will not be built on fear, but on trust. He turned to the communications officer. Send a message to all known systems. The officer nodded. What should it say, sir? Ryan looked out at the galaxy beyond, his eyes reflecting the light of 1,000,000 suns. Tell them, he said softly, that humanity keeps its promises. The message traveled faster than light, echoing through the void. It reached colonies, space stations, and ships drifting in forgotten corners of the stars. And wherever it went, it lit a spark. From the ice moons of Talaris to the desert world of Anchor, voices rose in answer. Together, we stand, they said. The galaxy had been broken for centuries, but now it beat as one heart again. Saran stood on the city's highest platform as the twin suns rose. She could see the human ships reflecting their light, 1,000 silver mirrors floating above. Admiral Ryan descended from his shuttle and walked beside her. The crowd around them cheered, humans and aliens standing side by side. Ryan looked over the horizon and smiled quietly. We never meant to leave, he said. We just needed time to find ourselves again. Saran nodded, her voice soft. And when you returned, you brought all of us with you. A gentle breeze swept across the plaza, carrying the sound of laughter and rebuilding. The world felt alive, breathing again after so long. Saran turned to the Admiral. What happens now? He looked toward the stars and said, Now we rebuild everything we lost and everything we never had. That night, the celebration spread across every continent. Lights filled the skies, fireworks danced among the stars. Children pointed upward, shouting at the glowing ships and tracing their trails with tiny fingers. Music echoed through the streets, blending human melodies with alien harmonies. It was the sound of unity, the sound of something new. In the command deck of the Resolute, the last transmission from Lyrithea was recorded. A simple message from Saran's voice. To whoever finds this centuries from now, she said, know that we were here, and that we stood together, not as species, but as one people under one sky. Her words drifted through the cosmos, carried on the same signal that once called for help. Only this time, it carried hope. As the fleet prepared to leave orbit, Admiral Ryan watched the planet one last time. The lights of cities glimmered like constellations below. He whispered to himself, we came back to save them, but they saved us too. And then, With a nod, he gave the order. All ships, set course for home. The engines ignited, filling the blackness with radiant blue. The fleet rose higher, turning toward the horizon of stars. Below, millions watched as streaks of light ascended into the heavens. And every heart that saw it knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. Because when all hope was gone, humanity had come back from the stars. And in their return, they left behind more than victory. They left a promise. A promise that no matter how dark the galaxy becomes, the light of humanity will always find its way home.